Please, sir, buy my car. The little girl sobbed, her voice cracking with desperation. Her tiny hands clutched a battered, old toy car, its paint chipped and faded from years of neglect. Her eyes were wide and hollow, rimmed red from endless tears. It's all I have, she whispered, voice trembling. But I need the money. My stepmother won't let me eat. I'm starving. She fell to her knees on the cold, dirt-streaked ground, clutching the toy as if it were her only lifeline. Her stomach growled loudly, echoing through the silence like a grim reminder of her suffering. She looked up at the stranger with pleading, tear-streaked cheeks, her voice barely a whisper. Please, sir, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten in days. Her small frame shivered from cold and fear. The sun was setting behind dark clouds, casting long shadows over her battered face. She was abandoned, forgotten by the world, left to survive on scraps and hope. Her stepmother's voice haunted her ears, harsh, cruel, forbidding her from even tasting a bite of bread. Every night was a new punishment, a new denial, a new reminder that she was invisible to those who should have loved her. In her mind, she saw her stepmother's face, cold, unfeeling, indifferent to her suffering. The woman's words echoed like a whip. You're nothing but a burden. If you're hungry, you should have eaten sooner. Now you'll go without. The words cut deep, sharper than any whip, leaving scars on her fragile heart. Her tiny hands clutched her stomach, and she whimpered softly. Her eyes darted around, searching for help, for mercy, for someone to notice her pain. But no one came. The world seemed to have turned its back on her, leaving her in this dark, lonely place. She begged again, voice breaking, Please, sir, I just want to eat. I'll do anything. Just buy my car and I'll be happy. I promise. But her words were drowned in her tears. The ache inside her chest grew worse, a mix of hunger, abandonment, and despair. Her face contorted with grief as she curled into herself, trying to hide her trembling body from the cold wind that whispered through the broken trees. Each breath was a struggle, each heartbeat a reminder of her helplessness. Suddenly, the sky darkened further, and the shadows seemed to swallow her whole. The air grew heavy, oppressive. Her small voice faded into a whisper, almost inaudible. Please, I just want to be loved. I just want to be safe. And then, amidst the darkness, a radiant light appeared, soft but blinding, like the dawn breaking through the night. The air shimmered with a divine presence, and a figure emerged from the glow, bright, compassionate, and powerful. It was Jesus. His eyes held all the knowledge of the universe, yet they looked upon her with tenderness. His voice resonated with warmth and authority. Child, he said gently, I see your pain. I see your suffering. You are not forgotten. Your tears do not go unnoticed. The little girl's sobs slowed as she looked up at this luminous figure. Her eyes widened with awe and a flicker of hope. She felt an inexplicable peace wash over her, as if the very darkness that had engulfed her was being lifted. The divine presence knelt beside her, reaching out a hand that shone with love and mercy. Your stepmother's words are not the truth, Jesus continued softly. She has blinded herself with her own pain and fears, but I am here to reveal the whole truth, the truth that you are precious, that you are loved beyond measure, and that your suffering is not the end. There is hope, and there is a purpose for your pain. The girl stared, tears still falling, but now they carried a different meaning. Release, understanding, a glimpse of something greater beyond her suffering. The divine figure's words echoed in her heart, promising that her story was not over, that her tears would someday turn into joy. As the glow around Jesus intensified, the darkness receded, and a new dawn began to break. The world, once cold and unforgiving, shimmered with the promise of redemption. The girl's trembling hands reached out, not for her toy car, but for the hope that her life could change. Her silent prayer was answered. It was the beginning of something greater, something divine. And in that moment, everything was about to shift. The little girl had only known hardship for as long as she could remember. She was just 6 years old, yet her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 silent tears. Her story was one of neglect and cold silence, a tragic pattern that had shaped her fragile existence. Her biological parents had long been absent, her mother gone before she could remember, and her father distant, wrapped up in his own struggles, leaving her with a stepmother who seemed to view her as nothing more than a burden. Her stepmother was a stern, unkind woman, harsh in her words, colder in her actions. She would come home late, often drunk or distracted, leaving the girl to fend for herself. When she was around, her stepmother's words cut sharper than any whip. "You're nothing but trouble," she would sneer, dismissing the child's simple needs as bothersome. She rarely cooked for her. Instead, the girl was left to scavenge scraps from the table or go hungry altogether. The child's tiny stomach growled constantly, her ribs pressing painfully against her fragile frame. But her stepmother turned a blind eye, too busy with her own misery, her own bitterness. The girl's stepfather was no better. Though he was physically present, he seemed numb and disengaged, as if he had resigned himself to a life of neglect and apathy. He rarely spoke to the girl, and when he did, it was only to rebuke her or tell her to be quiet. His silence was almost worse than the harsh words of her stepmother, an acknowledgement that her suffering was invisible to those who should have protected her. Life in that small, cold house was a relentless cycle of pain. Every day, she was reminded of her insignificance, of how little she mattered. Her stepmother forbade her from eating proper meals, claiming she was too fat or lazy. Though her tiny body was nothing but bones and skin, the girl was often punished for the smallest mistakes. Breaking a dish, spilling water, or simply being too tired to respond quickly. Her punishment was usually a slap or being locked in a dark closet, left to cry alone in the silence. She knew she was a burden, a weight she was told to carry but was never truly loved for. Her innocence was stained by neglect, her childhood robbed by cold indifference. She clung to her only comfort, her small toy car, a gift from a kind neighbor long gone. She kept it close, clutching it like a treasure, dreaming of a day when someone would see her pain and help her escape the darkness. One day, after a particularly harsh scolding for trying to sneak a piece of bread, she sat in a corner of the dusty, empty room, clutching her toy and crying. Her stomach grumbled painfully, but she was too exhausted to move. Her tiny hands trembled as she looked at the battered toy. "Buy my car, sir," she whispered through tears, her voice trembling with hope and despair. "Please, I need to sell it. My stepmother doesn't let me eat. I'm starving." Her words were desperate, her voice breaking under the weight of her suffering. She didn't understand why she was so ignored, why no one seemed to see her pain, why her pleas for help went unheard. In that moment of despair, she was completely alone, an innocent child abandoned by the very people supposed to care for her. Her plea was raw, a cry for kindness in a world that had forgotten her. She was just a small girl lost in a sea of injustice, her innocence overshadowed by neglect and cruelty. But then, something extraordinary happened. As her sobs echoed into the cold air, a radiant light suddenly appeared, soft but undeniably powerful. It was as if the heavens themselves had opened, and from that light, Jesus appeared. His presence was gentle but commanding, filled with compassion and truth. His eyes looked into hers with infinite understanding, and in that moment, everything changed. The darkness that had consumed her world was about to be pierced by a divine revelation. Something greater than her suffering was about to unfold. Every day in that cold, silent house, the little girl endured the same brutal routine, each moment worse than the last. Her mornings started with her stepmother's harsh voice, barking orders like a commandant. "Get up, you lazy brat," she'd sneer, slamming the door shut as the girl slowly rose from her small, torn bed. Her stepmother's eyes were cold, and her words colder. "You're too slow," she'd snap, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her outside into the freezing yard, where she'd be left to shiver alone, clutching her thin dress against the biting wind, waiting for some semblance of kindness that never came. One day, her stepmother decided to punish her for spilling a glass of water. Without mercy, she threw the girl out of the house, her small frame stumbling onto the dirt. "Go, get lost," her stepmother spat, eyes blazing with anger. "You're not welcome here until you learn to behave." The girl's tiny hands trembled as she sat on the cold ground, tears freezing on her cheeks, feeling the sting of rejection and abandonment seeping into her bones. She was hungry, exhausted, and shivering, but the door remained shut, and no one came to comfort her. That night, after cold, lonely hours crying outside, she crept back into the house, hoping for some mercy. Instead, her stepmother met her with a cruel laugh. "Didn't I tell you to stay out? You're nothing but a burden." Without warning, she struck her across the face, the slap echoing in the empty house. The girl's cheek stung painfully, tears streaming down her face, her small body trembling with shock and pain. She curled into a ball, feeling the weight of her helplessness. The next day, her stepmother's cruelty escalated. She refused to give her any food, claiming she was too fat or lazy, even though her ribs pressed painfully against her skin. "You don't deserve to eat," she snapped, tossing a measly piece of bread onto the floor. The girl crawled to it, starving and weak, and ate it quickly, her stomach growling uncontrollably. Each bite was a small victory over her hunger, but it was never enough. Her stepmother watched with a sneer, then turned away, leaving her to continue starving alone. In the following days, her stepmother's insults grew harsher. "You're worthless," she spat. "A useless child who brings nothing but trouble." She would slap her for the smallest mistake, spilling a drop of water, breaking a dish, or simply being too tired to respond quickly. The girl endured bruises and bruised feelings, her innocence chipped away with every insult and blow. Her stepfather, often silent and resigned, never intervened, his eyes avoiding hers as if she were invisible. One evening, her stepmother's anger boiled over again. She grabbed a belt and whipped her across the back, forcing her to the ground. The girl cried out, trembling from pain and fear, helpless against the cruelty. She curled into herself, feeling more alone than ever, her small hands clutching her battered body, desperately wishing for someone to save her. The house echoed with her sobs, a haunting sound that seemed to get lost in the suffocating silence of neglect. Every act of violence and rejection pushed her further into despair. Her tiny world was a place of darkness. No love, no comfort, only pain. Her stomach growled constantly, her body weak from starvation, yet no one cared enough to notice. Her innocence was eroded day after day, her spirit battered by injustice and neglect. She was a victim, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. And then, amidst her broken cries and silent suffering, a divine light suddenly cut through the darkness. A radiant glow appeared, illuminating the entire room, and from it, Jesus manifested. His presence was filled with love and authority, his eyes tender yet powerful. He looked at her with compassion, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The pain and injustice that had seemed so overwhelming suddenly felt different, pierced by the truth that was about to be revealed. In that divine moment, everything was about to change. The little girl collapsed onto the cold, uneven street, her tiny body trembling uncontrollably from exhaustion and hunger. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her clothes torn and muddy from days of wandering, and her small hands clutched her battered toy car as if it were her only hope. Her stomach was a gnawing emptiness that refused to go away, and her legs buckled beneath her as she sank to her knees, powerless and broken. She looked around desperately, pleading silently with the indifferent world, but no one was there. No one to hear her cry, no one to notice the tears streaming down her face. The street was eerily silent, save for the faint sound of her ragged breathing and the distant hum of life passing by, oblivious to her suffering. She whimpered softly, her voice barely audible over her own trembling, as she tried to lift herself up, but her strength had drained away. Her vision blurred, and her head spun from hunger and fatigue, causing her to sway dangerously before she finally crumpled onto the dirt. Her cheeks were cold and sticky from tears, and her small body shivered uncontrollably, her teeth chattering in the biting wind. Her clothes had been torn in the fight to survive. She had been thrown out of the house again, rejected and discarded like trash. Her stepmother's cruel words echoed in her mind. "You're nothing but trouble. You don't deserve food. You're a burden, and I don't care if you live or die." Each insult had pierced her fragile heart. Each slap had left a bruise deeper than the skin, and each rejection had shattered her hope a little more. Now, lying on the cold, unforgiving ground, she felt her strength slipping away. Her tiny hands clutched her stomach, which growled painfully, and her eyes fluttered as her eyelids grew heavy. Her breath was shallow, her body weak from days without proper food, and she wondered if this was how it would end. Alone, cold, forgotten. Her thoughts blurred with pain and despair. She remembered her toy car, her only treasure, and squeezed it tightly, wishing someone would see her, would help her. But no one did. The world around her seemed to have turned its back, leaving her to fade into the shadows of neglect and cruelty. Her sobs grew quieter, more exhausted, as her body shuddered from the cold. The tears dried on her cheeks, and her small chest heaved with each labored breath. She tried to call for help, but her voice was lost in the darkness. Her fingers trembled as she reached out weakly, clutching at the empty air, wishing for a miracle that would never come. She felt her eyelids flutter, her vision dimming, and the pain in her stomach intensified. An unbearable, gnawing ache that told her she couldn't go on much longer. Her mind drifted into darkness, her hopes fading into the shadows of despair. Just as her consciousness was slipping away, a strange, warm glow began to fill the street. The light was gentle yet overpowering, illuminating everything around her. A divine presence appeared, bright, compassionate, and majestic. Jesus stepped into the scene, radiating love and authority. His eyes looked upon her with infinite tenderness, as if he had been waiting for her all along. Her trembling body slowed as she looked up, eyes filled with tears and longing. In that moment, the pain that had seemed insurmountable began to dissolve into something greater, a divine truth that would soon be revealed. The girl's trembling body finally gave in, her strength completely drained. She collapsed onto the cold, uneven pavement, her tiny frame curled up as if trying to hide from the world. Her clothes, torn and muddy, clung to her fragile skin, and her face was streaked with tears that refused to stop flowing. Silent tears. No more sobs, no more cries. Just the quiet, exhausted drip of grief falling down her cheeks. Her hands, dirty and trembling, pressed softly against her chest, clutching her stomach which roared painfully from hunger. Her eyes gazed upward, seeking something, anything, that could save her, that could bring relief to her suffering. She looked at the vast sky above her, the darkening clouds swirling like a storm within her, and whispered a fragile prayer. Her voice was barely audible, a soft, trembling whisper lost in the cold wind. "Please, God, help me. I can't take it anymore." Her words hung in the air, weightless and trembling, as if her plea was a fragile thread dangling into the unknown, waiting for rescue. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the ache in her body and the emptiness in her soul. Her prayer was simple, pure, an unspoken hope that someone, somewhere, would hear her, understand her pain, and intervene before everything was lost. The street around her was silent, the world seemingly holding its breath. No passers-by stopped. No one turned to see the tiny girl who was barely clinging to life. The darkness crept closer, shadows stretching long across the ground, as if nature itself was surrendering to despair. Her small hands loosened from her stomach, her fingers trembling as they relaxed for the last time. Her breathing slowed, her eyelids grew heavy, and for a moment, she felt her consciousness slipping away. Her heart was pounding softly in her chest, a faint echo of her silent plea. Everything was about to end. Her suffering, her pain, her hope, all fading into the darkness. The sky above remained heavy and brooding, as if waiting for a divine answer. Then suddenly a profound silence fell. The air grew stiller, thicker, weighty with anticipation. The clouds parted slightly, revealing a glimpse of the starlit sky, and in that moment of suspended stillness, something extraordinary was about to happen. The scene held its breath, as if the universe itself was pausing at the brink of revelation. And just as her eyelids fluttered shut, as her last breath whispered into the wind, a radiant light burst forth, soft and luminous, yet overwhelming in its power. The divine presence was about to make itself known. Everything was about to change. In that quiet, heavy moment of despair, as the girl's trembling body lay curled on the cold pavement, something shifted in the air. A stillness that penetrated beyond the darkness. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The clouds above, heavy with unspoken sorrow, parted just a little more, revealing a faint glimmer of light that shimmered like a promise in the night sky. It was as if the universe itself was leaning in, listening to her silent prayer, ready to answer in a way she could never have expected. Suddenly, a gentle glow suffused the darkness. A light so pure and radiant that it seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It did not burn or scald. Instead, it embraced everything with a tender warmth that felt like a gentle hand on her shoulder. The light grew steadily, softly illuminating the cold street and the trembling girl as if it carried the very hope of heaven itself. And from that divine glow, a figure began to emerge, calm, majestic, and filled with a quiet authority that soothed every aching corner of her broken heart. It was Jesus. He appeared as if summoned by the unspoken cry of her soul, arriving at the exact moment when no one expected salvation. His presence was like a balm, calming the chaos, quieting the pain, and filling the emptiness with an undeniable sense of peace. His eyes, gentle yet piercing, looked directly into hers, seeing everything: the hunger, the fear, the loneliness, and yet, also, the unspoken hope that still flickered deep within her. His face radiated compassion, a divine compassion that reached beyond words, beyond understanding, straight into the core of her suffering. As he knelt beside her, the world seemed to pause. The darkness receded into the shadows, replaced by the luminous comfort of his presence. The pain that had consumed her was momentarily softened, replaced by a profound sense of relief, an overwhelming feeling that she was no longer alone, that the love she so desperately needed was finally here. His hands, gentle and strong, reached out, not to judge or condemn but to offer sanctuary, to lift her from her despair and cradle her in divine mercy. In that moment, everything changed. The heaviness that had weighed her down, that had made her feel invisible and forgotten, was lifted by his touch. Her silent tears, which had seemed endless, now felt as if they were being washed away by a river of grace. The pain in her stomach, the ache in her trembling limbs, and the ache in her heart all began to dissolve in the warmth of his love. It was as if he whispered to her soul, "You are precious. You are loved. You are not forgotten." The crowd around her, hidden in shadows, now seemed to fade into insignificance beside this divine encounter. Her eyes, shimmering with tears of awe and relief, looked up at Jesus, feeling the truth in his gaze, truth that was more powerful than any words could convey. He did not promise riches or worldly treasures, but instead offered something far greater: hope, redemption, and the assurance that even in the darkest moments, divine love was present, crying out for her, reaching for her, waiting to heal her broken heart. And in that sacred moment, as the light of Jesus bathed her in its gentle glow, she felt a peace she had never known before. A gentle reassurance that her suffering was not in vain, that her tears were seen, and that her story was not over. Jesus' presence was a reminder that even amid the deepest pain, there is always a divine purpose, always a reason to hope. The darkness that once seemed so impenetrable was now pushed back by the luminous power of love. The girl's trembling stopped, replaced by a quiet, trembling smile, one born of newfound trust and the gentle certainty that she was embraced by something greater than her fears, greater than her pain. Jesus had arrived not just to heal her body but to restore her soul. And as the divine light enveloped her, the world around her shimmered with the promise of a new beginning. She was no longer invisible or forgotten. She was seen, loved, and cherished beyond measure. In that sacred moment, she knew that hope had come alive again, shining brighter than ever. Hope that would carry her through every dark night, until dawn broke anew with the promise of love, mercy, and everlasting grace. The moment Jesus appeared, everything seemed to pause, like time itself held its breath. His radiant presence flooded the dark, cold street with a gentle yet undeniable light, transforming the shadowed corners into a space of divine peace. The girl, trembling and exhausted, felt her tears slow as a calmness she had never experienced before washed over her. She looked up at him, her small face illuminated by that heavenly glow, and felt a surge of strength rise within her. For the first time in a long, long while, hope flickered again, bright and clear. In the presence of Jesus, the suffering that had weighed so heavily on her tiny shoulders felt lighter. It was as if all the pain, hunger, and loneliness had been gathered up in his gentle hands and carried away. Her trembling hands clenched the dirt-stained fabric of her dress. But now her eyes shone with a quiet confidence, a newfound resilience rooted in divine comfort. She knew she was no longer invisible or abandoned. She was seen, she was loved, and she was protected by the one who had come to reveal the truth. Her silent prayer, once just a whisper into the darkness, was now answered with a profound, unshakable peace. The adults who had been nearby, her stepmother, perhaps, or passers-by, were stunned. Their eyes widened in disbelief, mouths parting in silent shock. Some looked away, ashamed, realizing that their cruelty had been laid bare in the presence of divine mercy. The stepmother's face, previously twisted with anger and contempt, now softened in a way that seemed almost involuntary, as if the weight of her own guilt pressed down on her conscience. She stared at Jesus, unable to speak, caught in the silence of her shame. Others nearby, maybe neighbors or passers-by, began to shift uncomfortably, unspoken questions flickering across their faces. What was this luminous figure? Who was this man, so full of grace and power, standing in the middle of their cold, dark street? Yet, the most telling change was within the girl herself. Her trembling hands now rested loosely on her lap, her shoulders relaxed. The hunger that gnawed at her stomach, the ache that haunted her every step, all seemed to fade in the presence of divine love. She felt protected, not just from physical harm, but from the despair that had threatened to swallow her whole. Her eyes, now shimmering with tears of relief, looked directly into Jesus's. They were no longer filled with helplessness but with a quiet, unwavering trust. She knew that her suffering had not been in vain, that someone had seen her pain and come to bring her truth and hope. Jesus's gentle voice, full of compassion, broke the silence. "You are not forgotten," he said softly, his words echoing into the depths of her soul. "Your pain is seen, and your tears are known. But now hear the truth. Your worth is greater than any hunger or cruelty. You are loved beyond measure, and there is a hope that no darkness can extinguish." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, filling her with a peace so profound she felt her spirit lift. In that moment, the adults around her, those who had been cruel or indifferent, felt the weight of their own actions. Some looked away, ashamed, their faces flushing with guilt. Others stood frozen, unable to deny the power of what they saw, divine mercy in its purest form. Their silence was deafening, a testament to how deeply Jesus' presence had touched the scene. It was as if his arrival had exposed every hidden shame, every moment of cruelty, and left it trembling in the light of truth. The girl, now steadied by divine strength, slowly rose to her feet. Her small frame was still fragile, but her spirit was renewed. She felt a newfound courage surge within her, a silent promise that no matter how dark the night, divine love would always find a way to shine through. The suffering she endured was real, but it was not the end. Something truly had changed, something eternal and powerful. Jesus' presence had turned her pain into a testament of hope. His divine mercy had shown that even the deepest wounds could be healed by love. The shame that once clung to the cruel adults began to dissolve in the light of that truth. They had been silenced, not with words, but with the undeniable power of divine grace. Their hearts, whether they realized it or not, had been touched by the truth that love always prevails. And so, in that sacred moment, everything was transformed. The suffering was not wasted. It had led to this divine revelation, this undeniable proof that no darkness is too deep for light, no pain too great for love to overcome. The girl, strengthened and comforted, knew she was no longer alone. Her story had been forever changed by the presence of Jesus, and through her, the truth would shine forever. As Jesus gently turned to leave, a calmness settled over the girl like a warm embrace. Her small frame, once trembling with fear and hunger, now stood steady, filled with a quiet strength she had never known before. The radiant light that had surrounded him began to soften, but its warmth remained, like the glow of dawn after a long, dark night. Her face, once marked by tears and despair, now held a gentle peace, a sense of wholeness that reached deep into her soul. She looked around at her surroundings, no longer seeing only shadows, but glimpses of hope that shimmered softly like stars in a night sky. Her eyes, filled with gratitude and newfound trust, lifted toward the sky in silent prayer, an unspoken thank you for the divine love that had touched her so profoundly. She knew in that moment that her suffering had not been in vain, that her tears had been seen and her pain understood by the one who had come to reveal the truth. Her heart, heavy with hunger and loneliness, was now light with the assurance that she was loved beyond measure. She felt safe, protected by the mercy and grace of Jesus, who had come to remind her that even in the darkest hours, hope could shine through. And as she took a step forward, her small hands clasped in a quiet prayer, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose and peace. The world around her, once filled with shadows of cruelty, now seemed touched by a divine light, shining brighter because of the love she had received. It was as if a new chapter had begun, one where love and hope would guide her steps, no matter how difficult the journey might be. Meanwhile, the people who had witnessed this miraculous moment, those who had been silent or even cruel, began to feel the weight of what they had seen. Some looked away, ashamed, feeling the truth of their actions reflected in the divine encounter. Others stood frozen, overwhelmed by the power of love that had entered their midst. Their silence carried a message of its own, a silent acknowledgement that divine mercy had touched them too, whether they realized it or not. That divine love, so pure and overwhelming, had changed everything in an instant. As Jesus' radiant figure slowly faded into the light, his parting words echoed softly in the air, words of love, hope, and reassurance. "Remember," he said gently, "you are never alone. My love is always near, even in the quietest moments of your life. Trust in that love, and let it guide your way through darkness into the light." His message lingered in the hearts of everyone who had been present, a reminder that divine grace is always present, waiting to be recognized, waiting to transform even the bleakest circumstances into a story of hope. The girl, now standing tall with a peaceful smile, felt the truth of his words settle deep within her. Her suffering, her hunger, her tears, they were real, but they no longer defined her. Instead, she carried forward the divine love she had encountered. A love that would sustain her, guide her, and remind her that she was precious beyond measure. She looked up one last time, feeling the warmth of that divine presence still shining in her heart, and whispered softly, "Thank you, Jesus." Her voice was full of gratitude, a quiet declaration of hope reborn. And now, as the scene fades into silence, we invite you to reflect. Do you recognize Jesus' presence in your own darkest moments? Have you felt that divine love quietly reaching out to you when everything seemed lost? Perhaps his message of hope is still waiting, just as it was for her, to remind you that even amid pain, love endures, and light will always follow darkness. The question is, are you willing to open your heart and see the divine in your life's struggles? Because, just like the girl, you might discover that the greatest truth and the deepest love are closer than you think, waiting to transform your story and lead you into a new beginning.